Well, cool, brother. Welcome. I'm very excited to have you here and just to kind of share with some people who you are to me, besides a brother and an amazing friend. It's been amazing, dude, to get to know you the way I have. We met each other in a peak experience, dude. It was such a cool time together. And you have very quickly shown yourself to be someone in my life that I can have a conversation with, that I can probably count on one hand how many people I can have that same conversation with. And what I mean by that is like your ability to be radically authentic, vulnerable, but also like, I don't want to use the word intelligence because I mean, you are insanely intelligent, but you are able to contribute to every conversation regardless of what topic we cover, which isn't something that everyone can do. Most people, they can definitely occupy the space, listen, be vulnerable, but to be able to also contribute is a very special talent that I've really enjoyed, like our conversations and our relationship over the years, and I value it because not only do I find myself sharing a lot, but I find myself being inspired by what you share, and so that's who you are to me, and I appreciate you being here, man.
Thank you, Ben. When I think about your show, The Journey of the Heart, I think for myself, especially, especially these last 7 years, I think has been a continual journey from heart or head to heart for me. So I think it's an apt title. And, when I met you, I'm still somewhere on the journey, and 50 years from now, I'll realize that I was just getting started. But, I, I was very much in that, head to heart transition space when I met you. And when I met you, I didn't know if you were real, because, you were one of the first people I'm like, hey, like, I've read the books by Alan Watts, David Hawkins, whatever, but I haven't heard other people say the things or talk about the same things that I had read about in the ways that you did. And I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. Like, the only people I've seen that think about some of the things that I was thinking about and really leaning into, you're one of the only people that I've ever met that would articulate some of the same things. So it's an equally special bond that I'm very grateful that we've had the opportunity to continue over the last 5 years or so.
I appreciate you, brother. Thank you very much. Um, I'm curious. So, like before we start every podcast, I guide people into their hearts, and we create like a beautiful space together. And you'd mentioned something came up for you. You open to sharing?
Yeah, I mean, all it was my girlfriend and I were trying to figure out what we were doing for dinner or if she was going to go back to her place. And
Yeah,
it was just, I just confirmed that she should stay and we should eat dinner after the podcast. And I think it'll be a nice evening.
it's really cool, dude. So, like one of the things that I share with people and guide people into is allowing them to shift from trying to make a decision with their mind and then just offering the question to their heart and being like a faithful observer to what the heart has to say. And it's so interesting because like most of the time you don't even have to ask your heart because your heart already knows what's going on. And if you can just create space for it, it'll answer any question straight away. And if you don't like question that answer that your heart has and just follow it, man, the coolest things come from that, you know?
And sometimes the answers wait, which is fine. But I
Yes.
think, and I think the technology of intuition is underrated today. And I think it's in increasing danger. You read about all the great stories and all the great myths of all generations. There's an element of, trusting intuition. The famous the gold you seek is in the back of the cave is like, hey, like you got to trust that this dark night of the soul you're going with is going to lead to someplace beautiful. And of course, there are tragedies too, so it doesn't always end in someplace beautiful. But um, yeah, I just think the intuition is extremely underrated, especially in our Western cultures that just loves answers.
Yeah.
We love answers. We have the emergence of the LLMs that are called answer platforms. They're not search engines. So I just wonder what's going to happen. I think we're going to have a resurgence to, you know, learning how to use our intuition, especially as every question we have can now be asked to an LLM. I think the intuition is going to be more important, um, but also underdeveloped in a generation. But,
Yeah, I
the other thing I
agree.
think about too is kind of a more homogenized culture. I think about when you and I were in high school and college, likely like, you had your friend group and your friends had your own lingo, and these days, if you talk to any teenager or high schooler, they're all saying the same things. 6 7, skibbity, riz, all that stuff. And, it seems pretty innocent, right? But I think at a deeper level is like as you homogenize language, you can also homogenize, thoughts, desires. You could have a generation that all wants the same things and wants to look the same ways. And I think that's really dangerous because I think a lot of people can end up. It's always been like this, but you can always run the risk of waking up and realize you're not living your own life. And that's not to say everyone's got to be the most, individual person. I think there's tons of wisdom and benefit of, societies where the atom of society is the family unit or even the broader community. I think that's something that's really relevant, but I just worry about that for future generations. So when you were out talking about the technology of the heart, that's something I think about when applying it to today's events.
Yeah, dude, that's super cool. Like something that comes up for me as you're talking, like you mentioned, like sometimes the answer is to wait. And I remember when I was doing my heart math certification, one of the things that they would talk about was like, oh, if your heart doesn't get back to you, just like leave it a voice note and like just it'll come back later. And I thought that was always like a super cool thing because sometimes like we want an answer right now, right? It's like, oh, I need the answer now, and it's like, well, maybe now isn't the moment to actually like get your answer. And if you're not sure, then why force it?
I
And so
think
that kind of came up for me.
I think about, the concept of, answers are often realized on the other side of action. So, a couple quotes come to mind is like Rilke in Letters to a Young Poet, the concept of living the questions.
Hmm.
As you pursue something, you're going to get information, and then maybe one time you'll learn the answer you're looking to in the past. And then Stephen Pressfield of the War of Art would ask, like, hey, are you a writer? Like, write and find out. Are you a dancer? Dance and find out. Sometimes I can get so bent out of shape around, making sure I'm doing the right things, but oftentimes just getting started and getting that real time feedback is the best way. And it's an active waiting,
Hmm.
which I
Yeah.
think can be very effective.
Yeah, I've found so much like joy and clarity by like realizing that knowing what I don't want is a great start. And
Mhm.
then even if I don't yet know exactly what I want, doing like just continuing to follow the path that I already know that I enjoy and it brings me joy and it feels aligned for me, and just trusting and having faith that the fact that if I just keep doing those things, then everything else will kind of fall into place. And like you said, that can be challenging sometimes, of course, um, because if we don't feel completely like safe and comfortable in the moment, then it's hard to like explore all the
Hmm.
corners that don't feel very safe. But um, I find the more I explore those corners, the safer I feel. And so, um,
I was at a weekend retreat a couple weeks ago about holistic wealth. So it's like a financial component, and then there's also kind of a nervous system, mindset, emotional, spiritual component too. And they talked about the most valuable resource we have is creativity. So like the ability to create. So you think about it in terms of the lens of entrepreneurship. It's like you are creating even in a business of any type, or any sort of service, like you're creating something, and that's how the value is exchanged. Um, so when I think about, you're talking about, I've had a lot of conversations on my podcast around, the power of a regulated nervous system
mm,
in the ability to create. I had a friend who, talks a lot about our brain structure and then also evolution. It's like, hey, the reptilian is to survive. That's kind of the reptilian brain, which is at the lower level of our brain. And then we have the mammalian brain, which is to love. Mammals are, uniquely capable of love. And then talk about like something that's uniquely human is the ability to wonder. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, if you don't have like the stability, sometimes that's material stability, like in a Maslow's hierarchy of needs standpoint. Other times it's emotional or nervous system regulation stability. It can be very hard to wonder
Mm-hmm.
and to kind of land the plane. Like, I've spent a lot of time thinking about leadership, meaning, and purpose, and kind of the best thing I've come up with so far as to what we're doing here on Earth is we have, the ability to dream or wonder as humans. So we should honor that and use that. So it's kind of, hey, dreaming the perfect dream and then working to make it a reality. And I think something very important to know is like if you look back at like the original definitions of perfect, it was different than it is today. It wasn't um, like free from defect. It's the way it should be was perfect. So I think that's a refreshing take is like, hey, it might not all look like you think it would, but if you, have a dream or a vision and you work to make it a reality, it might end up being perfect in the original definition.
I really enjoyed that original definition. It really it really matches up with like the way I kind of express myself to people, right? Like this idea, like so many people will say like, oh, like I'm not perfect, and oh, like life isn't perfect or this isn't perfect, and I'm like, I think it's absolutely perfect. And I think it's hard sometimes for people to connect to that. I know at a time in my life it was hard to connect to that because again, like you're looking at it from, like you said, the way that we perceive it to be now, or the definition that it is now. But I really enjoy that original definition because that's how I use it. It is the way it is, and so if it is the way it is, and it couldn't be any other way, then how could it not be perfect? Like, how else is it supposed to be? And so I uh I would love to get into your life story and kind of like talk about how you got here. But before we do that, can you just take me into your world right now? Like what are you up to? What are you excited about? What's going on?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really excited. I have a really great rhythm to my weeks, which is great. I'm writing a lot, particularly in the mornings. I'm working on a kind of a long form writing project uh, that I hope to make some progress on throughout the rest of the course of the year, which is really exciting. Something I've thought a lot about. And then I work at an M&A advisory firm in Austin. So I'm in the office 5 days a week. I spent 7 years kind of working with some friends on some entrepreneurial ventures. So it's been interesting to have the stability and structure of being in an office every single day, which, there are a lot of pros, honestly. Some cons, of course, but mostly pros. Um, and then pretty consistent exercise for me, weightlifting and running. Got some goals I'm running towards on both those. And then kind of across social life, in a committed relationship, um, do some, I don't really even call it community service work, but like I have friends my own age and do stuff with them, but I also have a mentee that's like 17, or he's actually about to be 19, but that I stay involved with. And then I have some kind of local kind of parent figures that I spend time with. So for me, I've found that, regardless of where I've lived, service and intergenerational relationships have made my life a lot richer. So, and in addition to that, I have a podcast called Tuesdays with Morrissey. I've at certain points I've really gotten up to releasing episodes daily or shoot weekly, but with the stuff I have going on right now, um, mostly monthly. I just released an episode with a guy named James Kerr who wrote a book about leadership lessons from the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. Very cool guy, very cool episode. A lot we can learn about culture and meaning from that organization. And then coming up soon, not sure when this will air, uh, just interviewed one of the founders of Firefly Aerospace, which was the first commercial company to land on the moon.
Hmm.
So we talked about, what it's like to pursue the impossible, um, what it's like to reach out to beyond the known universe in a sense, and kind of the journey to land on the moon. One of his comments was, "You can't land on the moon on accident." So have a lot of fun across work, relationships, and my creative outlets. Yeah, and living in Austin, Texas. That's where I am.
Nice. I remember one of the things that like I really felt into when I first met you, when I first started learning about your life, was the way that you serve and like some of the stories you told me about the people that you serve. I remember it was like this really older guy that you would go meet up with and
Mhm.
you would read books and stuff like that. And how did you like how did that start? Like how did that become something that you realized like lit you up and yeah, like where did
Yeah.
that start?
Yeah, I think when I think about the things I do, I think about I really like learning and connecting with people. So I think when I look at a lot of the things I do, like the podcast is definitely a part of that. Like even the stuff I do at work, I think is a part of that. And then the two kind of underlying themes of a lot of stuff I do is mentorship and wisdom are kind of the two things I think about often. Yeah, so when I was like, 26, 27, I just kind of realized some things weren't working. I had some like, the way I describe it now is some emotional blocks and spiritual blocks that I realize now that kind of prevented me from showing up the way I wanted to in relationships and in work and just in overall life satisfaction. So like a lot of people, I was able to find a counselor. It took me 3 or 4 times, but I actually found a good one. And she, helped me look at things from my past and sat with me and kind of worked backwards until eventually, over time, like started to be able to look at the present and then eventually the future, but kind of built that over time. And when I was working with her, she was like, "Hey, like I really think it'd be beneficial if you like had a mentor figure, and I have somebody in mind." So um, I ended up connecting with this filmmaker in Dallas who's, yeah, he's almost 70 now, but he was probably 62, 63 at the time. And she was right. We just really connected. I feel like this man was like one of the first guys who really like saw me or understood me or like, when you meet those people and you just want to keep telling them stuff.
Yeah.
So kind of that's
Yeah.
kind of how I felt. And I could say things to this guy that didn't even make sense to me. And he it was just all accepted and understood. Even if I didn't understand it, he understood it. So that was a super cool experience. Honestly, I look back at that kind of relationship, which still is ongoing today. And like that was one of the first times I realized that like love was real.
Hmm.
Like growing up, like, a lot of my life was kind of like, you know, conditional in a sense. Like I have great parents I love and love me, but in the dual role of like, raising a child and loving a child, like sometimes things got lost. For me, I think I tried to get a lot of value of things that couldn't provide it over time.
Hmm.
So whether that was like school, sports, traveling, social life, whatever it was, so it was very focused on kind of the more material conditional aspects of life experience. So yeah, it was around that time like a lot of other mentors started flowing in too. And like, I had, obviously this primary mentor and then, different ones that delivered different lessons. One really loved the goals. His definition was of success was setting a goal and meeting it. So knowing what you want and pursuing it. I had other mentors that came in that talked about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Others that talked about, you know, mission, vision, and values. Others that talked about strength. So like, over the course of like 2 or 3 years, I like just accumulated, a dozen friends in their 50s, 60s, or 70s. And so around that same time, I was like, holy smokes, like I am really getting a lot of value out of these mentor like relationships. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to serve in some way. And so I like, worked with my counselor mostly. And I was like, hey, like, what do you think I should do? Like, should I do like junior achievement or boys and girls club where I could talk to like a classroom of 20 kids? And we
Mhm.
ultimately decided like big brothers, big sisters would be a really good route and really invest in one human's life.
Yeah.
And that was an amazing experience. Like, you know, uh, being 14 isn't too much different than being like 28. I learned they're going through a lot of the same things, like thinking a lot about the same topics, but it was both amazing for me to be so in somebody else's corner. The muscle memory was there was a book I read that was talking about like the ideal mentor. A lot of my mentors are like in their, like I said, 60s and 70s, but the ideal mentor by some is 15 years older than you because they're young enough to know what's going on, but old enough that they'll never compete with you on anything.
Mm.
So, it was a really unique because like, I mean, look, I still remember what middle school was like, in many ways. And um yeah, it was amazing to be so far in somebody else's corner. It was also to witness like his own transformation from, growing to be more comfortable in his own skin or smiling with his teeth, in an authentic way. So like that was really beautiful. And then when I moved from Dallas to Austin, I somebody was like asking me like, "Hey, would you like get another little brother?" And I don't know if you know this, but like it was a way bigger time commitment than I thought it was going to be. I thought I could do like once a month or twice a month, but it ended up being every week. Like once I realized it was like the most fun thing that this kid does in his entire week, like, and the impact it was making, like it was hard to do it any less. Um, but when I came down to Austin, I was talking to an older friend about like, hey, like I really want to try to do something with seniors. So just kind of a natural desire to do something kind of on the other end of the life cycle. And when I got down here, I got connected with kind of this volunteer super connector that was like, hey, would you want to like read articles to a retired UT professor with Parkinson's? And I was like, yeah, that sounds perfect. Like I love reading. And so I've been friends with this retired UT professor for 3 years and his wife. And that was the amazing thing. It's like I thought I was like, reading to this older man and ended up, connecting with the couple so deeply. Um, and I have a great friendship with his wife. So I have a friend who's, the man's in his 80s and the wife's in her 70s, but great friends and add a ton of richness. I'm looking at a plant she gave me like just off screen right now and was over to today. So that's a little bit. I just kind of when I realized when I got the opportunity to experience what it's like for somebody to like pour into me,
Mm.
um, I just kind of had a natural inclination to want to try to be on the other side.
That's such a rich experience, dude. I mean, as you're talking, there are so many things that are inspiring me along the way. It's just like, there's so many people out there that feel like they have no one that they can talk to. There's so many people out there that feel like they have nothing to offer anyone else, right? So there's so many people out there that feel like they're not worthy of being on either end of that stick, right? And little do they know that they're worthy to be on both sides, right? And I just encourage people to feel into that and explore that because it's like, man, to have a space where you can authentically be yourself is one of the biggest things that would change anyone's life.
Mhm.
It's crazy, throughout my life, I've realized that a lot of people don't feel like they have that space. And most people don't feel like they have that space with the people that you would think that they're closest with, right? Like whether it's their family or their spouse or, whatever it is. And, the act of service the act of serving others is like a cheat code, dude. I feel like to life, man. Like, and people don't take advantage of it, and I don't think they realize it's a cheat code, man. It's like I said this the other day. I heard it somewhere. It's just like, like if someone walks up to you on the street and asks you what time it is, like for that, like 5 seconds of you like looking at your watch and being like, oh, it's 5:30. It's like, dude, it's the coolest feeling. It's like you're giving someone something so simple, which is the time, but you're being of service. And I think that like once we are able to give from a place of pure service rather than requiring something back, then we enter this really beautiful place of giving becomes receiving and receiving becomes giving. And it's this kind of like energetic cycle that like sustains us, man. And, as you're talking, that's kind of all I'm thinking of is just like, you one of the questions came up for me was just like, like obviously you got given your first mentor, but how did you get the rest? And as as I felt into that, it's just like, well, of course you got the rest because that's where your energy was going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once we start giving our energy towards things, we just start attracting all that we could want or need. But it's just something so important, dude. Like I serving and being of service. If I like, I don't know why we're here, but if I had to guess why we're here, I mean, that's got to be very close to the top of the list. Like, it's
Yeah.
got to be top of the list. It's like once we've figured out our own shit, that's all we want to do. Like that's what I've realized is like once I've come to a place where I've liberated like my soul, or once I've liberated myself, however you want to say that, all I want to do is serve. All I want to do is be of service. And I feel like it's our natural state of being. And sometimes like our shit just kind of gets in the way. And sometimes when our shit gets in the way, we feel like being of service is actually like a heavy weight or burden on us,
Mm-hmm.
And that couldn't be any further from the truth, I feel.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think it takes people a long time to learn how to serve. I think, it takes a long time to get comfortable enough with yourself to be able to serve, I believe. I think, you know, growing up, like through high school and college and even early adulthood, a lot of friends are kind of materialistic and conditional. But I think the goal is, to your point, is like, hey, like find people, like you want to just spend as much time around people that you love and that love you for who you are, so you can maximize the amount of time being yourself. I also think there's like, if you can feel comfortable, you can be more creative and therefore more impactful. And then I think the other thing too is like, I was talking to like an older friend once, and he had a kid in high school, and the high school daughter was all bent out of shape about worrying if they were going to make enough impact in their service project. And because that's the way they would be evaluated on their college applications and such. And I think it's a little bit of a shame, and I think it's why it takes a long time to learn how to serve. It's because it takes people a long time to realize, like, holy smokes, we went out for 6 weeks to try to help these people, and you had no you would never have guessed what we learned
Mm,
about it.
yeah.
So I think, to your point about the reciprocal nature of service, I do think it's a tremendous, tremendous cheat code.
Agreed, dude. Such a cheat code, man. And it's fun, dude. Like once you realize it's a cheat code and you just kind of like continue to put in that code, it's man, the things that come from that are so amazing. Especially with the relationships, dude. The relationships that come from that are just, man, so cool. Um, so like as you look back, like what moments or experiences would you say kind of like shaped your awakening? I know there's probably so many, but like what comes to mind?
To some extent, and this may be like a common answer or not. I always felt somewhat awake. I definitely think I had layers on top of it of conditioning or um, kind of how we mold and to our environment. So a good example is when I was 21, a friend I met, I went to state school in the Midwest, and this friend went to UC Berkeley. So very different cultural schools. And I was like, hey, like, it must have been so cool to go to school with so many people that were free thinkers. And he was like, no, man, like, they weren't any more free thinkers than at your school. They were just playing a different role.
Hmm.
But I remember being, curious about meditation, going back to like high school and college. Like one of my college roommates' moms was a yoga teacher and gave me like these tapes, and I would listen to these tapes but it's kind of just kind of like a one foot in type thing. I think and even still I struggle with this from muscle memory is just like looking through emotional spirituality through a conditional lens. I think when I was like my start was like I was in some relationships and just like had some emotional blockers that couldn't allow me to like be there fully for another person.
Hmm.
That was like a big part of it for sure. And like when I realized like, okay, these anxieties, fears, whatever you want to call them, were impacting me from meeting my life goals. And that's really like to me like what caused like the wake up in a sense to really wake up to a level that I was willing to address them. For the longest time I was aware of anxieties, fears, and shames, but I thought I could like outgrow them, as or like if I could just like get better at everything else that these things would dissipate. And yeah, I think that was kind of the biggest thing when I think about my awakening, was just kind of like when I realized like, oh, this is impacting me from meeting my goals, and then also this is impacting more people than just myself.
Yeah.
I would say it'd
Yeah.
be the two things, and that was kind of a mid-20s awakening.
Doesn't surprise me that you were pretty aware pretty early on, dude. You kind of seem that way, like when I met you, that you'd been asking similar questions for quite some time. um, and so, like, you'd mentioned, earlier in the conversation how the transition or the journey from like mind to heart or head to heart, right? And like you said, this is a lifetime journey. And I don't think there are stages on this journey. I think we're just on the journey. But like, what is like at this moment in your life, where you've come in this moment, like, what does living from the heart like mean to you in everyday life?
I'll caveat the answer with, it is still a struggle I have. I think, I can, I have a lot of muscle memory around trying to solve things with my head. So,
Yeah.
it definitely uh, is challenging. I think, for me, introspection is, a friend and a foe, but generally it's a friend. I think, one of my mantras, if you don't know what you want, you're only left with comparison. So I that's something that's like, over the last few, 5, 6, 7 years, I've spent a disproportionate amount of time journaling and, answering certain questions of myself. So when I think about living from the heart, I think about alignment. Going back to an earlier conversation, like early in this episode, uh, the concept like around perfection and like our reality being perfect. I think you know to get to where we want to go, you got to be where you are. And I think introspection's a big part of that. It's like, where are you really? Like, where are you in your relationship goals? Where are you in your health and fitness goals? And yeah, for me, it is fairly a mind answer still, but like I have a lot of comfort getting really clear on what I'm trying to do in this season of my life, and then um, spending time on the things that um, are important to me.
Mhm.
And in that, have an orientation of gratitude for the ability to do it, and the energy to do it. So I think it's not only like what I'm doing, but how I attempt to do things. I think creating space throughout the day, and if not the day, at least the week, to like remember that I'm doing the things I want to be doing, and how I do them is equally as important as what I do. Um, Helps me live from the heart, but at the same time, like I still have, episodes and struggles where I like worry if I should be doing something better or different.
Mhm.
Um, and you just kind of have to sit with those waves when they come.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is pretty much like you put your energy towards focusing on the things that you are passionate about and that feel aligned to you. And then by doing those things, they allow you to be in a place within yourself that feels like you're coming from your heart. So, kind of like filling up your cup until it overflows and then just pretty much overflowing onto the world with love.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it comes from, efforts to get directional clarity, alignment with time and action and values. This like, writing project I'm working on, like, I spent, years like not writing every day, even if it's small amounts. And, what I found for me personally is like not writing every day is harder than writing every day. Being in the limbo of not doing the things that you say you want to do is harder than doing them. So I think aligned action is a big ingredient for me from living from the heart.
I love that, dude. I love that, dude. It's just so relatable for everyone. I mean, I know it's very relatable for me, right? It's like these things. It's like, oh, I really want to do this. Like, do you? It's like, yeah. Are you doing it? No. It's like, all right, well, like, and there's so many ways to kind of like have that conversation. It's like, well, I mean, obviously, there's a part of you that really wants to do something else instead of doing that because otherwise you'd be doing that, right? And I think that's a really interesting thing to kind of reflect on is realizing that there are parts of us that desire different things, and which of those parts do we want to nourish. I think we should love all the parts. That's not what I'm saying, but I think there are certain ones that we desire to nourish more than others,
Mm-hmm.
but because we've been very dominant with certain parts of us, we stay dominant in those instead of giving the other ones more energy, right? And that's kind of the way I look at it now. I used to look at it differently, like, oh no, like it's just me and I want all these things. It's like, well, not really, because some of the things I know I don't really want anymore, but I'm still doing.
Yeah.
And to me, that's more of just, a program, subconscious program, or again, another way to look at it is like there's a part of me that's used to that, that finds comfort in that, that enjoys that. But now there's another part of me that wants to explore something else. Um,
Yeah. An idea I've been exploring is just like how our society and culture can get sacrifice wrong. It's like, it's like, oh, like you're sacrificing by waking up early and doing this project, or, staying in on a weekend night to do XYZ, or to, pursue whatever. It's like, no, the real sacrifice would be not doing the things, and not pursuing your potential, and something that you say or know deep down is very important to you. That is the true sacrifice
Agreed.
that I think we get mixed up in. I think it's a little bit of like a, it's victimhood versus ownership at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we get sacrificed wrong in a lot of different ways, dude. I think we get sacrificed wrong in intimate relationships, dude. I hear it all the time. And it doesn't resonate with me at all. It's like this idea where it's like, no, man, there are so many ideas of love that have been taught to me throughout time that I have come to a place where it's just like, that's not love at all, dude. Like, that isn't love. Like, this idea that sacrifice is love and sacrifice uh, is what's the word I'm looking for? Pretty much like is a part of love, and you can't be in an intimate relationship without embracing sacrifice. I don't know. It's kind of like, to me, that doesn't make sense. I just feel like I'm in a relationship, in an intimate relationship, and someone desires something of me or requires something of me, whatever it is, right? And if I am an active, willing participant in this relationship, then I have two options. Well, I'll create the third one, which is what the sacrifice they're talking about. So I'll create the third one. So the three options are, for me, I do the thing joyfully, happily, because I'm a part of this space and I desire to contribute to this space and contribute to my partner. I don't do it because in that moment, it doesn't feel aligned for me, and I follow what feels most aligned for me. The third option is I do it and I feel resentment for doing it because I didn't really want to do it, and now I sacrificed for doing it. Again, that's just my definition of sacrifice. I'm sure other people have different definitions of sacrifice, and so that's why I wanted to kind of play it out. But for me, in an intimate relationship, to me, it's very simple. I have two options. My two options are, in that moment, I am able to connect to love, acceptance, the space that I'm in, and I happily do it. Or in that moment, I'm able to connect to love and the space that I'm in and realize that that's not something I want to do. And either way, it's okay. Either way, it's aligned. Either way, it's serving, right? Now, don't get me wrong. There's also the other side of it where I'm unaligned, egoic, and make all those decisions. But I'm not talking about those right now. I'm just talking about the
Mhm.
aware decisions that I make. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I believe that when you take action in line with your priorities, it's not a sacrifice.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. I just think I understand the challenge though, and I've experienced the challenge,
Yeah,
right?
it
You're in
doesn't mean
this.
it's not. It doesn't mean it's not hard.
Correct.
Yeah, it
Correct.
doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean it's not
Exactly.
painful. It doesn't mean there's not going to be days you don't want to do it.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Um,
not living in line with your values and priorities is a bigger sacrifice,
yeah,
of course, than doing the hard things to live aligned with your values and priorities.
agreed. Um, and so as uh as I close out every conversation that I have with people, I have a few questions that I ask them. So I ask everyone these three questions. Um, and so the first question is, what personal practice has been most transformative for you?
Mentorship and service.
Hmm.
It's no question. I mean, active journaling with somebody, active journaling with a real person with perspective. And, as I connect with friends that are older, mentors that are older, I'm somehow integrating their wisdom. You know, I'm integrating myself with the future self. And similarly, as I serve others, or if I get a chance to serve younger people, like, I'm integrating the past too. So those two practice mentorship and service, which are related. They're
Mm-hmm.
both
Mm-hmm.
we're student and teacher, so it's just
Mm-hmm.
both ends of the spectrum have been the most transformative practice for me.
Dude, I think you've cracked the code. I want to say a few things. Firstly, thank you for sharing like your life's experience, because there's not too many people I speak to that have had that experience and have jumped in that pool that you've jumped into, and it's just so rich, dude, and so beautiful. I resonate very deeply with the teachings of the law of one, and
Mm.
they talk about in that book that we're in like a learn, teach dimension, right? Um, and what I take from that is pretty much like, once we experience something or learn something that is just very profound for us, or, we feel is like very impactful, then we can't help teach it.
Yeah.
Right. And as we're teaching, we're also learning. Right. And it's just this like beautiful cycle. And so I think a lot of people, like some people go to books for that, and books are beautiful. Right. But to be able to have that learn, teach experience with another person, there's just so much more to that than just a book, right?
Mhm.
there is the book, and then there's the rest of it. There's the interaction, there's the emotions, there's the feelings from the other person. I mean, there's so much more. And so, yeah, that's just really cool. And I remember, dude, when you were telling me those stories when I first met you, how much like that inspired me to want to do the same things. And so I think that's really cool.
I appreciate the question though too, because I was thinking like, I've meditated over the years, some seasons every day, other seasons, when it serves me. But it was a really cool reflection to realize, some of these things I do are truly practices. And I think about practices, I think about ritual, and I think about kind of the, sacred nature of some of the things we get to do on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. They are a practice, dude. I'm glad you got to feel into that because, I mean, dude, like what you're doing is not only insanely impactful for you, but for the other person that encompasses that space. And it's just such a beautiful, like, I just envision this like circle of just like energy continuing to be like circulated through the two of you. And it's awesome, dude. And I think it's something that we as human beings should offer ourselves more and more of.
Mhm.
I think that could be I think it's something that a lot of us are missing is more and more of that connection where we get to experience what it is to learn and gain wisdom from someone else, but also be able to share our experience and experience what it's like to give that to someone else as well.
Yeah, I think a lot about that. I think a lot about the disillusion of social groups, whether it's like religious, cultural, ethnic. Like,
Mm-hmm.
think about the concept of spirit animals. Spirit animals in certain tribes were, they would match up older tribesmen with the same spiritual essence as younger tribesmen to help the younger tribesmen cultivate that essence.
Hmm.
So since they're in, and it might be different than their father. Oftentimes it was different from their father. Sometimes it was the same.
Yeah.
But they had this like built-in infrastructure to allow for that reciprocal cycle to take place. And today, there are certain groups that still maintain,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I think about fake uncles, you know, cultures that have a lot of fake uncles like still have some of that, but for a lot of particularly Americans, like you kind of got to find it yourself, like
Yeah.
you asked like how I found mentors. Some of them I just reached out to, you know, hey, I've like, hey, this is something I'm interested in. I would love to, speak with you about it. And,
Yeah.
or I'd ask other people, so some of it was initiative, but I think a lot about that through a societal lens.
The two things come up for me. It's funny you say fake uncles because pretty much like Diego, Tyler, and Ramez, like we're all uncles to their kids, right? And so it's like everyone that they call is like, oh, this is Uncle Ben, this is Uncle Adam, and I just really love that dude. I really, really do. And something else, man, that has consistently come up to me through this conversation that I haven't touched on yet is just like, and it made me think about it even more when you're talking about tribes and stuff like that. Is like the the importance of our elderly and like us learning from them. It's just something that was so ingrained into I feel like from everything that I've read, obviously I wasn't alive back then, but from everything I've read, I mean, all they talk about is like the wisdom, the wisdom of the elderly and
Hmm.
how much, their counsel was given and like was the final word when it came to pretty much everything, right? That's where, when women were looking to become women and learn how to do everything, they would learn from the older women. When men were looking to become men, they would learn from the elderly. And it's like now I just feel like, and I'm talking about myself as well. For a lot of my life, I would look at my grandparents as, I mean, the most coolest, amazing people ever, dude, right? Obviously. But at the
Yeah.
same time, like, oh, you don't know. Like, you don't know what I'm going through. You don't know what's, going on. And the more I've changed within myself, the more I've obviously realized that those were just not very true or aligned thoughts. And the more I've opened myself up to talking to my grandmother and to talking to more elderly people, the more I just continue to realize like what is there, the wisdom that is there, and what most people are missing out on. And I'm sure that's something that you've obviously realized in your life.
Well, you made
But I
me think of
wanted
something
to,
new. you don't read a lot of stories about cultures that have like not a lot of respect for their elderly
Exactly, dude.
in
Exactly.
older texts.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
I obviously knew like there's a lot of reverence for the elderly in traditions, but I never really thought about the fact that the contrast is never true.
Dude, it's crazy, dude, and it's crazy that we're just accepting of this. Like, it's like, oh yeah, this is the way it is. It's like, dude, like this isn't a good road to go down, I feel like. And I feel like that's where we're losing a lot of the things that, man, that made us who we were and allowed us to connect to the things that are important, you know.
Hmm.
There's just so much to learn there, and I just encourage people to open themselves up to that avenue, and honor them and respect them and fucking learn from them, dude. You know. Um, so I appreciate you bringing that up because it's just so important, dude. Um, Second question: how do you stay open and loving when the world can sometimes feel heavy and cruel?
So one of the things I've benefited from doing a podcast, it's allowed me to ask very honest questions directly to the source. So um, a conversation with kind of the original conscious leadership power couple, Gay and Katie Hendricks. Gay Hendricks of The Big Leap. Together, the two of them wrote a book called Conscious Loving. Anyways, they are 80 years old probably, and did a podcast with them. And I asked them a very similar question, which kind of informs my view on this. I asked them
Mm-hmm.
about maintaining an abundance mindset in times of economic scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
And so it goes back to the comments around, you know, emotional regulation and creativity. So, from that conversation, what I took away was that, the fruits of the human experience are creativity, authenticity, and love. I think that is kind of the high ideals that we are seeking. So when you think about, leading with openness, staying open, um, those are, if you're open, you're, authentic, you're loving, hopefully you're creative too. And so the question then is like, what are the ingredients for authenticity, creativity, and love? And really, what I took away from that conversation and still continue to think about all the time, it's presence, ownership, wonder, honesty, and courage are the things I really lean into. So, yeah, when I think about staying open, I think about presence, ownership, um, wonder, wonder being a big thing. There's a poem called "Monet Refuses the Operation," which I've read to you, and in times will evoke a lot of emotion from me.
Yeah.
But it's a fictional story about how Monet in real life had bad eyesight, but it's a fictional conversation he's having um, with his doctor, and he talks basically is describing how it's taken him all his life to see the world as this beautiful, and he won't go back to seeing um, a universe of objects that don't know each other, where there's no interconnectedness. So I think a lot about wonder as part of a process of staying open. Um, and then I really think a big, big thing is honesty and courage. Being the willingness to be honest with yourself on like where you're at, and then having the courage to, own it and take steps towards it. So those are my 5 pack of ingredients for staying open.
Dude, so cool and so practical. Like, you just take that with you, you know?
Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, I would have to agree. It was really cool to hear that question and for you to answer that question with those. Hmm. Man, I could talk about that for a long time. All right, cool. So last question. If you could speak to your younger self, what loving wisdom would you like to leave in their hearts?
Um, so on the Enneagram, I'm a four. You know, an Enneagram four is like an individualist artist. And so, you know, part of kind of the shadow side of an Enneagram four is that there you can think there's something wrong, you know, something wrong with you, or so it'd really be around like, hey, there's nothing actually wrong with you, and the things that you're worried that are wrong with you are actually your superpowers. So that would be the biggest thing. And then, you know, I'd say, you know, with that kind of underlying wound of, you know, thinking something was wrong, I think I spent, and I think about this a lot, like, you know, through college, we're always in like a cohort. And so I just think about the concept of like running your own race. And so I would just encourage myself, lasting wisdom would be, hey, like there's nothing wrong. These things you're worried about being wrong are actually your superpower strengths, and really to lean into that and run your own race. Like I have a mentor that talks about, you know, the goal, if there was a goal, the same guy would say the purpose of life is to go through it. But he said, you know, with that said, you know, everyone's going to learn the lessons in some form or fashion, but if there was a goal, it'd be to learn the lessons sooner so you have more time to enjoy them. You know?
I like that. Yeah,
So
I like
uh
that.
yeah, I just think a lot about, I'm very grateful to learn the lessons. I'm very grateful for the host of experiences. But you know, if I had the chance to coach this kid up, I'd say, hey, like let's run our own race now and, you know, save 5 years in the process.
I mean, dude, it was very evident to me when I met you that you were a special dude. Now, like, I can say that to a lot of people, like, hey, you're special because everyone is special in their own way. But to like, kind of articulate it, like the way that, man, the way that your mind works and the way you're able to express things in the words that you use, just I very, very quickly was able to pick up on the fact that, all right, man, like this is someone that like I want to spend some time with, dude. Because the things that I can learn from this guy aren't things that I can just learn from the average person. And when you're talking about like going back and talking to your younger self and letting them know that, the like there's nothing wrong with you, and actually the things that you think are wrong with you are like your superpowers. Like I realized your superpower straight away, dude. I was like straight away. And so did Kat, man. Kat, I remember Kat being like, I really like that guy. I was like, yeah, me too, man. It's like, dude, he's like really switched on. And she's like, yeah, like she's like, I remember Kat exactly what she said to me. She's just like, I find it hard to talk to people that like just don't like a lot of people don't listen. Like that you think like they're not actually listening to you, number one. Number two, like they don't actually really care about like what you're talking about. And like number three, that's just like very surface level. She was like, all of those three things, he was exactly like the things that I wanted. Like he was really listening, he really cared. And it's just super cool. Because especially to get that reflection from Kat as well, because obviously I spend a lot of time with Kat, and
Yeah.
I always get very, very joyful when I see her in that experience because I know her. Like I know that I give everyone the time of day, right? Like, and then very quickly they will show me whether I continue to give them more time and energy, right? But for Kat's much quicker than me to cut that off, right? Kat's just like, yeah, way too surface level for me. I'm gonna go over here.
Yeah,
Right?
sure.
She's very quick, and I respect that, dude. I'm like, cool. And so when I get to see her connect with people in that way, it really excites me. And again, you're one of those people. And so Dude, I really appreciate you taking the time and energy to have this conversation with me. I'm really excited for people to hear this because, now more people get to experience what I get to experience in my life. And I just know how much they're going to take from this. And so thank you, dude. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Ben. It was a pleasure.